Hey, welcome to Everyday Economics. This is the podcast that helps you understand the economic world going on all around us. Everyday Economics is brought to you by the Center Square Newswire service. I'm Krug. I'm publisher of the Center Square. And Orphe Divounguy is my partner, and he's a PhD economist. Today is Monday, June 5th, 2026. And in this episode, we're talking about Venezuela. Orphe, we commit to talk about things that are in the news. I don't know that there's been a bigger story in the U.S. over the last 48 hours, certainly not a bigger story in Venezuela in the last 48 hours, than the capture and extradition of Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro. Some people would be upset that I referred to him as president because of the issues with the 2024 election, but that was the title that he held. At any rate, Nicolas Maduro is out. He's actually I believe he's in a jail in New York City at this point. Venezuela is sort of, I guess, on to the next thing with the help of the United States. Regime change and the economics of a regime change. That's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today. So the economy in Venezuela, I think, it's the long-term view on what's gone down in Venezuela, I think is probably, it's somewhat crude, but framed around the idea of the Venezuelan diet. That the prosperity of that country, which was once very prosperous country, has melted away. People are literally starving in that country, and over the last 10 years, of course, the U.S. interest in that, in the country itself, the foreign operations that were starting to take place or have been taking place there, where we've had reports that Iran is on the ground there. Certainly Cuba's been on the ground there for a while. Russia's been on the ground there. But we also started to hear in the last, I think 5 or 6 months that both Hezbollah and Hamas started to operate in Venezuela. And that amplified, I think, U.S. Policy action to the extent that they went and they grabbed Maduro. It's somewhat of a crude summary, but what's gone on in Venezuela has not been just one or two things. It's been a lot of things, and so
I gotta say I can't even pretend to really understand, because I'm not really a expert in geopolitics or I try my very best with history, just paying attention to what's going on.
In fairness to you and to others, I mean, the U.S. media has invested a lot of time over the last, probably since I was a boy, since the hostages were taken in Iran, on Middle East policy and what's going on in the Middle East in terms of leadership. South America, even though it's much, much closer, even though it's in our hemisphere, is a bit of a mystery.
Right.
So, I think beneficial to the conversation would be not to necessarily get deep into the details of how Venezuela became what it is today. There are other places where you can get that information. You're going to get it from people that are know a heck of a lot more about it than you and I do.
Yeah.
But why don't we talk about sort of the economics of a regime change?
Yes.
I mean,
I think that's fair. There's a lot of research, a lot of economic research on this topic. Look, the CIA-sponsored regime changes in Latin America, Ecuador 1963, Brazil 1964, Chile 1964, Bolivia 1964, and Panama 1981. What does the research show? It shows that you end up with a decline, not an increase, but a decline in per capita income up to 5 years after the intervention. And so while, the locals or even the people abroad may celebrate the end of one regime, potentially a dictatorship, right? Very often what you tend to see is a lot of chaos, especially after the Americans leave, right? So the Americans leave and you tend to see chaos, but also you leave a power vacuum, right? And that power vacuum gets filled by another dictator very often, right? And so another regime that's just as hard or if not worse, right? And so so it's not really positive. The outcome is not very positive historically. And we've seen what happened in the Middle East. We have research to show that basically in Latin America, similar negative outcomes have happened, over time. And so not necessarily this solution to the problem, go in, take control, fix things up, hoping that somehow is going to bring democracy and improve economic outcomes,
Sure.
Right? And again, I am not talking about the current situation in Venezuela because I know nothing about Venezuela. I'm just sharing what the research shows on this topic. And so sadly, it's not kind of this this magic pill. You go in and you can go ahead and fix a country overnight. It just doesn't happen that way.
Right. I mean, so in looking at this, and in terms of, well, first of all, I mean the U.S. the U.S. intervention and at the point of Nicolas Maduro's departure from office. I mean that's documented, but I mean that's really just single phase, right? I mean, the United States has said that it will, and this came straight from President Trump's mouth, will run the country, and nobody's clear, exactly what that means at this point. I mean, or certainly for how long. I mean, so in the midst of a regime change, what changes economically in terms of your historic or your understanding of the history of regime changes?
Yeah, I mean, usually there's a lot of uncertainty. You have people that are trying to flee Venezuela right now. If you watch the news, you have people that are afraid, and so they don't go out and spend it, right? Sometimes
Right.
You have curfews, and you have, and so all of that actually slows down the economy. And so I think that's part of the problem, right? And then over time, you also get the fact that very often it's just another leader that is either part of the former regime or maybe not part of the former regime, but who comes in and ends up in a similar corruption stories, right? I mean, we saw what happened in Afghanistan and in other places where the U.S. has intervened. Very often it starts out okay, and then it just spirals downhill after that. And sadly, that's kind of the history of these military interventions. Now, the case of Venezuela is really interesting. Like everyone else, I'm just watching the news and reading what's going on. And in Venezuela, there's this potential for raising the amount of oil supply, right, that the country is currently producing. And I think that is very, very interesting. From an economics perspective, right? That there's, that the country used to produce a lot more oil, and that in the 70s, and that after the Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro governments, you start to see this big decline in oil production, and potentially that oil production could even triple as a result, right? And of course, that would help to keep oil prices under control. So that's, part of the story that's out there. A great article in Bloomberg this morning I read that I shared with you. And so, but ultimately, there's going to be some pros and cons, but the history is not in favor of all of a sudden seeing massive improvements in democracy and improved economic outcomes for the locals.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen overnight. Are there? Let me ask you this, and then we can close this out. I mean, obviously, this is a story that's going to be evolving, and we'll certainly come back to it. I mean, Venezuela, because of the oil reserves that it holds, the reportedly the largest oil reserve in the world, like larger than the oil reserve in Saudi Arabia. There's some challenges, with the oil that comes out of the ground in Venezuela and offshore. I mean, the physical composition of this oil is I guess very, very thick and very, very difficult to refine. But let me ask you this question here. What should we be looking for as we consider what's going on in Nicaragua as it pertains to the economy of that nation in the short term?
You meant Venezuela, right? Venezuela.
Forgive me. Did I say Nicaragua?
Yeah, you did. So, yeah, I mean, stability, right? If people can go on about their business and continue to function and like a well-functioning economy, like the country can continue to function, right? And people can continue to go out with their daily lives. I think that's what I'm hoping for, right? If you start to see kind of a population flight, you start to see schools and businesses being shuttered overnight or staying closed for long periods of time. Those are the things that would be concerning, right? Because it would just basically show that it would have a negative impact on their local economy.
All right. Well, we'll certainly be keeping an eye on this, and we'll come back and we'll check in.
By the way, when I watched the president on this, he's mentioned oil companies going in and hiring locals, right? So again, we're just going to have to wait and see,
right,
what is actually going to take place in the case of Venezuela, and hopefully it will be different from what we've seen in the past and what the research shows on this topic.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And this is all early. We're very much in the early stages here, right? Okay, well, let's call it good. Thanks as always, Dr. Rowe. Make sure that you read Orphe's Everyday Economics column every Monday at the Center Square and listen to what we have to say every weekend on the Center Square Radio Hour.